Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an absolutely insane final day of the World Rapid Championship, which just concluded literally 2 minutes ago. This video is a recap of rounds 10 through 13, all the way up until the end of the action. The timestamps on the video player are per round. I'm going to try to show you as many games critical to the standings as possible. I hope you can keep up with me. We're going to be moving pretty quickly. I'm going to be jumping into certain positions rather than starting from the beginning. Let's just have a blast. Here we go. It's about to be absolutely awesome. So we kick things off in round 10. First game of the day, Nodirbek Abdusaturov from Uzbekistan in first place, and very close to Magnus, about half a point out. And these players have a wild opening, which is in English, but it turns into kind of like a very locked Rui Lopez almost. I mean, because as you can tell early on, no one is trading any pawns. Nodirbek gets the bishop pair. In fact, he gets the entire bishop pair. He gets both bishops versus both knights. Magnus then completes a tour of his knight to the middle of the board on d4 and seemingly has no problems launching an attack onto Nodirbek, who's just castled short. Bishop h3, h5. I mean, like, Magnus is coming for him while leaving his king in the center of the board. We have takes, and Nodirbek fires one right back. f4 on Magnus Carlsen, because 4 of his 5 pieces that are not pawns are on the back rank. We got to get after the world champion, right? So we have gf4, gf4. My king is always going to be safe on h1. Absolutely nothing to worry about. And so he tucks it away. But at this point, it becomes clear that Magnus's position is really tough to crack, and he castles long. He just gets the king completely out of there and continues his attack and assault on Nodirbek's king. Nodirbek at this point transfers his rook to g6 and decides, you know what, if Magnus takes me, I'm going to move this pawn forward and I'm going to try to promote it. The problem is it becomes more of a liability than an asset, and he can't hold it together. The pawn on g7 now is going to fall, and Magnus has an army of dark squared pawns to counteract Nodirbek's dark squared bishop. So Nodirbek tries to create a little bit of counterplay by going with the queen to the h-file and taking on h4. His bishop is still the problem. What's he going to do? He tries to reroute the bishop, and Magnus now has to start opening up the position a little bit because there's just too many pawns, right? And at the same time, he can't take on d3. There's this check, so he needs to safeguard his king. Queen h3, king b7, and we have a little bit of a queen dance. Nodirbek kind of bringing his king back into the action, because that's what you have to do in endgames. And here comes the strike of Magnus. Is Magnus going to break through as the center begins collapsing? Probably not. As bad as Nodirbek's pawns are, AHD, like the worst bowling pin concoction you can create, he's actually surviving. And Magnus is still applying pressure. The king is walking bravely onto a4, trying to attack the a-pawn. And at this very moment, Magnus misses a tactic that would have just cleared everything off. Queen takes h5. Maybe he didn't miss it. Maybe he thought he had something better, but you can't take the knight. And if you take this, it's check, and then you win the queen and the pawn. The game's over. But Magnus doesn't do it. He plays for f5, and all of a sudden, Nodirbek's h-pawn is like, what's up? Why didn't you get rid of me? Now we're in a queen endgame where my pawn is just going to go. I'm going to keep checking you, right? We have Nodirbek playing for a win. He brings the queen with the pawn. Now his king just has to get out of perpetual. Nobody even knows what they're playing for. Is somebody going for a draw or a win? The king, queen, pawn. And on move 80, after a wild chase around the entire board, it's like a James Bond car chase, you know what I mean? I mean, it can't tell what's happening. No more checks. There's no more checks. That means now a queen trade wins the game. A queen trade wins the game, and a queen trade wins the game. The queen on h8 has to take, and you would just promote this pawn, and Nodirbek Abdusaturov has now shocked the world. The 17-year-old has defeated Magnus Carlsen. This is absolutely insane, right? At the same time, in that round, Nepomniachtchi is playing against Alexander Grishuk. We're jumping into their game. This is still round 10. Stay with me. And this game was very balanced. It was queen rook 6 versus queen rook 6. Jan, slightly better structure. He's got the 3 connected on each side, where, you know, Grishuk has A and C, a little bit split. Grishuk sacrifices the flank pawn so he doesn't have it as a liability, and he breaks apart Jan's position, but Grishuk doesn't have a lot of time. And this is move 36. And from what I saw on move 39 in this position, either Grishuk lost on time or he resigned because he was going to lose the c6 pawn. That's the whole summary of, like, this game wasn't like a crazy game. It wasn't, you know, a tactical shootout with a king chase around the board. This is the final position. So I don't know if Grishuk lost on time or just decided he didn't want to play queen rook 6 versus queen rook 4, but the game ended. So Jan catches up to Nodirbek, and now they are leading the tournament going into round 11, while Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana, Hikaru Nakamura, Alireza Firouzja, all the big names half a point away from them. Let's see what happens in round 11. The first game, we got a rematch of the World Championship. I mean, who doesn't love this? This is absolutely amazing. And you know what's pretty fun? They play a Catalan. Now, we know the Catalan in game 6 with a different move order was what Magnus used to beat Jan, but here we get El Clásico. Now we're going to get... what? We get a move from Magnus Carlsen, which according to my database, has been played like never. Like literally never. It's almost never been played. It's been played by a few GMs, but almost never. And the game gets so weird so fast. Jan takes and puts his knight on d5, like, yo, what is this bishop doing here? And then doesn't even take it. He sacks his b-pawn, baiting the queen forward. Knight takes f4 and knight to a6. Now here comes Jan's rook. What kind of a Catalan is this? This is pandemonium. Knight c3, c5. Jan just trying to, continue to move forward. Trade off here. Remember, Magnus is half a point behind. And it looked like Magnus actually had quite a nice position. His knights were dancing. This rook kind of trapped, right? Like, looks like Magnus might even get a win here. But Jan quick with the counterplay. Queen b6, bishop f6, and his pieces are just laser beaming on Magnus's position. And after rook b2, bishop b2, that rook is no longer going to be trapped. It's obviously been traded, and we have a mass simplification. So we have knight e7, and for a moment, actually black is a pawn up for a brief moment. The problem is that when you get this endgame, opposite colored bishops, 4 pawns versus 5, Magnus just hunts down the a7 pawn, and even though it's a very temporary 4-on-3, because it's all on one side, you're not going to win this. You're not going to win this against Magnus Carlsen, especially if he can always get a trade of rooks, because opposite colored bishop endgames are usually drawn, and especially when pawns are this close and close together, so they draw. A nice little wrinkle in a Catalan, as always, for Magnus Carlsen, but the game is a draw. But this round was nuts. The next game I would like to show you from this round is the game between Vladimir Fedosеев and Nodirbek Abdulsatorov, who you just saw beat Magnus. Nodirbek is in trouble. He is under serious pressure here. Material is equal, but his bishop is passive, and these 2 pawns, if they can break free, are just going to decide the game for white. So, we have bishop to b4, and Nodirbek right here blunders. He plays knight to e7, attacking the rook, and we have rook e5, and white is winning. White is completely winning, because if you take the rook, I take this rook, you have back rank problems, you get mated. So rook takes c5 is probably the only move. The problem is that now that pawn is just going to chop on through, and the attacking side likes to have the opposite colored bishops. It's not an endgame, because the one bishop can't defend against the other. So as this game is moving forward, one guy is about to be 2 pawns up in basically an endgame. He's 2 pawns up. He's got 4-on-2. Nodirbek is dead lost. Now Fedosеев is going to catch everybody. He plays rook h6, missing an opportunity here. I think knight f7, hitting the rook also, and knight h6 is just crushing for white. And suddenly Nodirbek is activating his pieces and then traps the rook. He traps the rook. He's down 2 pawns. He might be down 3 pawns if he loses a5, but his pieces are so active. He's using what he has, and suddenly they swarm the king. This white king is just stuck in the back rank. That rook is trapped, and there's nothing you can do here. And suddenly, mass simplification. And Nodirbek saves a +4 position for white. And it's a draw. Nodirbek does not lose. An extremely clutch game in round 11, saving the half point. But it's not over. If you thought this was anywhere near over, we're not even through 30% of these games. This is an absolutely insane day of chess. Here we have Nakamura Khavkhanyan also in the same round. How is Hikaru going to do anything in this position? Rook bishop 4, opposite colors. This pawn's just a square away from promotion, but Hikaru controlling the promotion square and making sure the game goes on. And you see the problem? Both players have pawns on the colored bishop of the opponent, but these pawns are a lot weaker because they're split. These pawns are very well protected. So Hikaru doesn't trade rooks, keep some pieces on, let Khavkhanyan potentially self-destruct, bring the king over, keep the rook dancing, right? The game's going on, nothing's happening. Looks like nothing's going on. King comes over, still can't take, not gonna take. Okay. Uh-oh. Whoops, we just blundered, and Khavkhanyan plays rook to g3 with the intention to meet bishop h4, gh4, rook g6. But he blunders an in-between move. He blunders a check and is down a full bishop, and Hikaru gets out and goes on to win this game in 25 more moves that I'm not going to click through. He wins the game. Hikaru now joins the pack. It's still not over in round 11 because Levon Ranyan is playing Guha Mitraba from India, who's got a rapid rating of 2100 and a classical rating of 2500, crushing everybody in this event. But Ranyan finds a beautiful tactical sequence to take, and come back. So he finds this sequence, and he has a queen in 4 versus queen in 3, which you need a professional to be behind the wheel of this, okay? He's got to push the pawn forward, make sure there's no perpetual check against the strong grandmaster, or international master, but soon to be approved grandmaster from India. And on move 51, the pawn triumphantly makes it through. The king avoids perpetual. And now Levon has joined the pack. It's still not over in round 11 because you have Badur Jobava versus Gukesh D. A very strong Indian grandmaster and a teenager, 15, 16 years old. And Jobava in this game goes ballistic. He goes crazy on the king side, sacrifices the rook on d1. But it's not over because he's also about to sacrifice the knight. I mean, my man, Badur, in round 11 is just sacking the house, and Gukesh started the tournament 2 out of 4. But Gukesh now has to defend this game and not get mated. So what does he do? What does he do? Make sure there's no mates. Bishop back to f8, danger levels. You hit my queen, I hit your queen. That's how it works here. Let's trade bishops. Badur trying to checkmate him, but the king's safe. No more checks. All the king's got to do is run. And the king, you bet your ass, that king ran all the way across. And Badur trying to attack, but at the end of the day, one guy's got a rook, and the other guy doesn't. And we have king d8, king e7, and even though the pawns survive temporarily, the problem is you have this wave of pawns on the king side, by the way, very pretty. Pretty scary position. Pretty scary. The problem is the pawns can't queen, and those pawns can, and those pawns do queen. And Jobava resigns. An absolutely wild game this was. I mean, what the hell? This is insane. Badur sags the house, but survives, and the king runs. Oh my god. So now Gukesh has joined the pack as well. So we've got Nodirbek, Magnus, Jan, I mean, Hikaru, Fabiano, Firasev, like the whole squad is there with all their points out of 11. And now we go to round number 12. The first game I would like to show you is Gukesh coming off of this huge win against Nodirbek, coming off of this huge hold. All right? Gukesh, early on, decides, I'm not going to castle this game. I'm going to play h4. I'm going to play h5 in case he castles short. So what does Nodirbek do in round number 12? He goes long. King f1 versus long castle. What the hell is going on? So now we know we got to open up the lines. We have b3, beautiful. Pawn trade, open up the rook, the light squared bishop. Nodirbek doesn't hesitate either. Here comes g5. I mean, we got round 12 and round 13. That's all we got for glory. I mean, we got to win. Nodirbek's in first place, right? So we have knight c5, take, and now Nodirbek plays queen c6. Very natural move. Looking to take, looking up to play on this diagonal with knight to f4. Huge blunder. And Gukesh is winning. Gukesh plays queen c1, precise move. Defending c5, cuts the diagonal, and unpins the rook to the bishop, and now just begins consolidating. Rook h4. How are you going to get into white's position? Nodirbek gets desperate here. Plays knight d3, queen c4, and sacks the knight. It's a full knight. Queen g2, but it's not mate. And if you check me, I block. That's it. That's it. Nodirbek is about to lose, and Gukesh is going to get a 5-game winning streak spanning days 2 and 3 of the entire event. So Gukesh is about to win 5 games in a row. Nodirbek's like, are you though? Rook d5. Queen g7 back. Oh my god. Oh my god. And rook d8. It's not over. Because even though it looks like white is about to deliver a mate, queen b2 comes in, and this is madness. This is absolutely nuts, because if you take my bishop, I have this. You can't take, it's mate, because the knight is covering mate right now. So bishop e2, but kabam! You can't take, because queen takes rook. So king f1, and watch this, we go all the way back to g7, and Nodirbek saves the game with a perpetual check out of nowhere. Again, saving a dead loss position. He could have had 0 in both these games, but he has 1 with 2 draws. That is huge for Nodirbek. In the meantime, we got Alexander Grishuk and Fabiano Caruana. Wild opening this one was. I don't know what the hell's going on in this game, but it gets very wild right here because we have long castles. And as you just saw in the game between Grishuk and Caruana, this is this game. Nodirbek and Gukesh. Yo, when dudes castle on opposite sides, it's gonna get wild. It's like those videos you see on Reddit of people just brawling. B5, H5, A4, Rook H6, and now F5. F5 is an interesting move because maybe you have ideas of something coming to F4, right? You're preventing Rook G6, Rook F4, E4. I mean, I don't know. I'm just whatever. Brainstorming. F6 maybe in the future. Doesn't matter. Cut off the queen and the rook from circulating. Fabiano's like F5, Bishop H4, G5. Like, this is a completely insane game. Who is going to get at whose throat here? Faster. We have F6. F6 is the only move, with the idea of not Rook F5, because that would very triumphantly hang mate in 1. But the point is to meet G4 with bam. And if you take my rook, I have knight E7. And you know what the best part is? Fabiano went for this. I'm not kidding. Like f6, he sacked his queen and played f2 check. King f1, bishop d5. White is winning. Well, better. Winning is a strong word. Computer thinks that white is better. But white's king has literally no moves. Like, white is a couple moves away from getting mated. Much faster than white can deliver a mate. So what does Grishuk do? Plays bishop e5, very natural move. Bishop takes f6 back, letting the white king breathe, but taking the pawn. And now rook g6 and bishop g5. He really wants to trade, because the queen and the rook for white are not really factors in this game. Bishop g5, rook g5, king f2. But the pawn continues to chomp away. It's black who's going on the attack here. And when the dust settles, we have bishop e4, queen e1, and let me tell you something, only one guy got to attack his opponent in this game, and that guy was Fabiano Caruana. These pawns died on the verge of breaking into the castle, and Fabi, the final pawn to chop away on the g-file, and Grishuk resigned because you cannot prevent the infiltration here, and Fabiano Caruana has also joined the leaders. He is tied for first, but that's not the final game in round 12. The final game I have for you is the game between Magnus Carlsen and Levon Ranyan from round number 12. Magnus on board 1, playing against Levon. Knight e5, f4, f5. Magnus just going for it. Full steam ahead here, trying to just completely checkmate Levon, blow him off the board. Levon finding creative ways of defending. Look at this. Bishop h6, sacks the rook. g4, coming in. He's like, I don't care. Magnus, you got to deal with me on that side of the board, buddy. It's a board's got 3 sides. All right, b5. Computer's showing some insane stuff here. I'm not going to show you what the computer shows. Doesn't matter. It's ridiculous. A b5, and we have this game is a complete slugfest. Knight c3, opening up the bishop to this king. B c3. I'm telling you, he's coming in from the side. How is Magnus actually going to break through on the position, on Levon's position? Bishop f8, rook b3. Levon leaves the bishop among all his pieces. We trade, and gf5. He has to be precise to defend. Knight d5. So he's down in exchange. But the counterplay still exists. The counterplay's still there. It's right on the queen side. The b pawn is a little bit annoying. The queen can always come check. And we have a queen trade. So Magnus says, all right, buddy, let's go to an endgame. No queens, no knights. No service. 2 rooks, 2 pawns, bishop, rook, 3. Can I win this? Well, let's see what happens. So we have rooks doubling up to go attack the h7 pawn. So the king survives. And the pawn falls. Now we have, basically, when you do the math of this position, we have rook versus bishop. Each side has 1 pawn. Is this a draw? Is this a win? Okay, they beeline for a position of not rook bishop versus 2 rooks, but rook versus bishop. It's like, looks like a draw, because how's the h pawn ever going to get through the g pawn, right? Rook versus bishop is a draw. It should be a draw. But how are you going to win this? Like, this is unwinnable, even with the pawns, right? Well, the problem is that one guy is named Magnus Carlsen. One guy gets to this position, and the only way to win this is to force black to move the pawn up and then box out the king. Use the concept of the bishop being on a bad diagonal to make black run out of moves, rerouting the bishop and the king to passivity and then winning. Magnus, look at this. Are you watching this? He walks the king down. If that didn't happen, he would have walked the king all the way around to that square. Levon decided to do it, and you see Magnus can't sack the rook for the bishop and the pawn. So what does Magnus do? He forces the black king to be passive with threats of mate from the other side, kicks out the king, and gets in front of the pawn, and removes the move. He just cuts all the moves. Now he's ready. Because now if you sacrifice, king is not in front of the h-pawn, which would be a draw. It's being shouldered. And it's a win. Magnus Carlsen wins this game by winning the pawn and promoting it, and Levon resigns. He's an endgame magician even in short time controls, and Magnus Carlsen defeats Levon in round 12, and we are on to the final round. It is a 4-way tie for first place. Magnus Carlsen, Jan Nepomniachtchi, Fabiano Caruana, Nodirbek Abdusaturov. Behind them, we have Hikaru Nakamura, and we have Jan Krzysztof Dura and Gukesh, 8.5 points. So in round number 13, Fabiano Caruana, 9 points. Jan Nepomniachtchi, 9 points. And we have a 6-move draw. I'm not kidding. They agreed to a draw in 6 moves. You're allowed to be as outraged over that as you'd like. It definitely is a little bit ridiculous because of the drama in the title, and as we will discuss after all the round 13 games are done, and as the timestamp shows. Crazy not to play this for a win, for a gold medal. This is the final game, but okay. A draw is a draw. Fine. Next game I have to show you is the game between Nodirbek and Jan Krzysztof. 9 points versus 8.5. After a relatively unsuccessful opening for Nodirbek, Duda with a better pawn structure, 3-3. We saw this in the game Nepo Grishuk 3-3, right? The nice structure versus kind of the split one of white. He takes over the initiative with this very nice central pawn break. And because his wall of pawns is so powerful, it's difficult for Abdusattorov to move forward. Abdusattorov tries to get into a rook endgame with a worse pawn structure. The problem is, it's really worse. He has 4 pawn islands. He has 4 pawn islands. Pawns that are completely by themselves. This is a pawn island. It's a double pawn. Horrible position. And Duda is just going to chop him down straight down the middle. I mean, he's just winning. If he just brings his rook and his king, right? So what does Nodirbek do? He creates the only counterplay he can. The flank pawn sacrifice. We saw Grishuk do this. And now, despite seemingly on the verge of losing his pawns like dominoes, here comes the rook. I lost 1 pawn, but here comes my rook. And I'm hitting everything. And Duda has to play rook h6. And he doesn't. He plays rook to g6. And after h4, and now rook f7, rook g7, somehow Nodirbek's activity is going to save him. It's crazy. He's still down a pawn, but this is a theoretically drawn endgame. Why? Because now I have an asset. Doesn't matter that I'm a pawn down. You have a c pawn, I have an f pawn. And that's exactly what happens. As the player's time dwindles, Nodirbek kicks out the rook and then just keeps checking and pushes his pawn, and he makes it to f7. And this is simply a draw. The king comes, the rook comes, and there's nothing you can do. You're not going to promote the pawn because your rook can't shield the king and can't stop my pawn. And on move 67, after some more dancing, Nodirbek saves yet another game. That is 3 saves on the final day and a winner versus Magnus Carlsen. It can't be so bad. So Nodirbek is now tied for first place, which leaves one final game. Hikaru Nakamura with white versus Magnus Carlsen. If Hikaru wins, Magnus doesn't get anything. Hikaru ties for first. If Magnus wins, at this point, he gets gold. It's the gold medal because he's got 9 points. Magnus plays a really strange Queen's Gambit declined. Plays Queen b6, super weird move. Opening not super important. I mean, you know, both sides castle. Hikaru puts out his bishops. And the biggest moment happens right around move 20 when Hikaru decides to trade knight for bishop and then sacrifices queenside pawns to open up Magnus's king and go for queen f5. And the idea is very simple. Rook g3, mate, right? But Magnus defends. Gives the king a little bit of breathing room. Hikaru chopping down the trees. Queen trade? Sure. We can queen trade, but only if I open up my rook. And this seems like a very scary proposition for Hikaru, right? To go to a rook endgame against Magnus Carlsen, especially when you might be down a pawn. Time is ticking, right? So rook e5, rook f4, d3. And Magnus, it seemed, was kind of stopped in his initiative because even though he's a pawn up, just like Nodirbek, 4 pawn islands. You're not going to win this. It's unwinnable. You got 4 pawn islands. Even if the pawn survives, Hikaru correctly trades the rooks and goes for the flank pawn on the outside. So he saves it, but gives up c6, but wins that a pawn, right? He's going to hunt that pawn down. He's going to win it. So this endgame, a draw. Some ways that black can create some problems for white, absolutely. But the reason it's a draw is because your rook is stuck behind the pawn. You just can't, the rook can't get out. And even if it does get out, you might lose the h6 pawn. Like if it goes to b5, which it does a little bit later in this game, it does get to b5, you can't push the a pawn. And then if you can't push the a pawn, why do you have an a pawn? So Magnus is playing this game, and, you know, I mean, you got to go through the motions. You got to put, you know, some practical chances. You got to try to put some pressure on your opponent, but it's a draw. It's a draw. Until, absolutely shocking moment, Hikaru puts his king on h3. And king to f6 is played, and here, after rook to a8 and king e5 and rook back to a4, there was some moment a little bit later when there was an opportunity for Magnus to win this game. It was absolutely nuts. Like Hikaru ended up saving it, but if we just back up for one moment here, king to d5, right? When this king was on h3, and Hikaru went to attack this pawn. In this position, the move rook to e2 wins the game for black. It's over because after rook takes f5, check, the rook is able to come back and block. The engine doesn't even see this at first. Something like rook to e5, and the game is over. Magnus Carlsen had the gold medal in his hand. He could have gone for this. Rook comes back to f4 to go over here, king c6, rook to a4, rook e3, this is winning. Because king b5, king b4, and you promote the pawn. Unbelievable moment. Rook to e2 wins the game for Magnus Carlsen, but instead, it's a draw. And you know what that means? It's a four-way tie. It's a four-way tie for first. But according to the FIDE regulations, folks, the top two on tie breaks play a playoff for gold and silver. And third and fourth place are decided also by tie breaks. They don't even participate. Magnus Carlsen gets third place on tie breaks, despite being in the top half a point of first place the whole tournament. Fabiano Caruana with the quick draw doesn't make it. He gets fourth. He gets nothing. No medal. Prize fund the same. All the money is the same. So the playoff is Nepo and Nodirbek for first and second place of the World Rapid Championship. And the playoff is Blitz. And here is the playoff. And I'm about to show it to you. Crazy. I mean, this format makes no sense. How you got 4 guys tying for first place and only 2 of them get to play? And the counter argument to that is, well, obviously got to do that. What if 10 guys tie for first? That almost never happens. They cut the amount of rounds of this tournament from 15 normally to 13. And all of a sudden we have this problem. Unbelievable. It's so mad. I was so mad about this. But you know what? I can't be mad about the playoff. We got a good playoff, even though I'm really mad about the playoff. No Magnus. He gets bronze by technicality, even though he's obviously the favorite. Even if he lost to Nodirbek, Magnus is the favorite in any head-to-head matchup. First Blitz game. 3+2 Blitz. 3-minute, 2-second bonus. Title Tuesday style. And Jan is playing Nodirbek Abdusatorov due to tiebreaks. The tiebreak system is a mix of things. Head-to-head score, the sum of your opponent's scores, sort of weird stuff that you can't even control. You guys can look this up. It's called Buchholz, B-U-C-H-O-L-Z, something like that. I don't even care. It's a Spanish, and we are going to go 24 moves deep of this game. Completely wild stuff on this game. Like, Nepo's sacrificing a full, like, he doesn't have a bishop anymore, but he's going for the queen in this. Nodirbek, until move 24, did not think. Now, if you'd like an instant replay of what just happened there, it was a Spanish, it was an open Spanish, and Nepo sacked a piece. Nodirbek had to offer a queen, and the queen's hanging, and our bishop can take a rook in the corner, and when the dust settles, material is balanced, and white is slightly better. In fact, white is a lot more than slightly better, because when Nodirbek actually started thinking on his own, it seemed like he was in prep for 24 moves, he blundered immediately. Bishop d5 is apparently like losing, because white can trade queens, open up the c file, and play g4, h4, which he got to do anyway. He actually got to do it also in this move order, where he is much better. He's much better because he controls the c file, the d pawn is a liability, and h and g are going to create an outside pass pawn in the future. gh versus g, trade the 8 on the h file, boom, boom, boom. Nepo playing a beautiful positional game, but he allows a little counterplay here. Allows this d4 move. Now it's very clear what's going to happen. Rook c6. Nepo can get a winning position here by chopping and playing g5. If this continues, trust me, one guy is a lot faster to make a queen. Rook h1, rook d1, doesn't matter. He's going to make a queen. Nepo goes down the middle instead, and Nodirbek somehow is able to save his king, save his d-pawn, and get into a knight endgame where I'm not sure there's many winning chances. He sacks on a6 and activates his king. Perfect defensive play. Sacks the b-pawn as well, but wins the h-pawn. It's 2-on-2. By my math, that's equal amount of pawns, runs the king directly back to the center, and the pawns on the queen side ain't going anywhere. And, well, Nepo sacks the knight, and the players clear off all the rest of the pieces. So Jan misses his chance to win with white. And now Nodirbek has an opportunity to win with the white pieces as well. Nodirbek gets the white pieces, and if this game is a draw, we go to Armageddon. But this is an insane recap, right? So we have c4, and we have the exact same opening that we saw in the very first game of this recap, Nodirbek versus Magnus Carlsen. We have bishop to b4. We have d3, d6. And a very locked structure. I mean, no trades. Bishop, okay, fine, we'll trade bishops, but no pawn trades. Right? So who's going to go where? Well, castles, queen e1, here comes the queen to the king. Oh, you're bringing the knight. Okay, got it. You're going to transfer the knight to f5. Makes a lot of sense. Beautiful. c6, closed structure. Like, no, only piece trades. No pawn trades. Knight to h7, trying to play on the dark squares, but Nodirbek seems to have a very nice plan of attack here. Just go attack on the f-file, right? Okay, no queens, fine. Rook back, fine. Knight g5, I don't even know what that knight is doing. And I'm going to go over here, maybe. I'm going to kick your knight out. Bishop g4, I'm going to pressure it, but here comes knight a4. With the threat of boom, and this has to stop guarding that. So, Jan plays f6. And Nodirbek begins kind of trying to expand in the middle of the board, because he's not getting anywhere on the king side. We have b5. Okay, cb5. Knight b5. And at this point, remember, it's blitz. Players got like 90 seconds on the clock. It's not rapid anymore, not 15-minute chess. King f7, h5. h5 is a nice move because you put all the dark squared pawns, right? You control the light squares. Nice position. We have a knight trade. Still pressure on the queen side for Nordjrbek. He might move his rook over, attack the weak a pawn. Bishop back to e2, attacking the rook. We have a dance. All right, something's got to happen here. We just got way too much pressure here in the middle of the board. We got crisscross applesauce on everything. de5, fe5, ed5, cd5. Oh, everything is pinned to everything. e4, yes, that final touch. And now Nordjrbek is in the clear. He is running. He's going to win that d5 pawn. He does. And we go to a rook endgame. 5 pawns for Nordjrbek and 4 for Jan. King g5, the king is active, but so are these rooks. Ooh, the rooks are powerful. Don't trade rooks and lose a rook, though. No rook e6. d6, beautiful move. Look at that lateral attack on a5. Jan's like, I don't want to lose it. d7, though. Now we got rook f2, king g6, rook e7, and rook f7. You can't take this, but I'm going to get that. Rook d3, king f4, rook b8, rook g7, king h5. Wait, rook e5, king h4, rook g4 is mate. He misses it. He misses it. It's still completely winning because the pawn is so strong. Rook e8 possibilities in the future. The king can come protect and hide on f7. Rook takes b2. It's mate. Rook g5. hg, rook h7. If rook g5, it's the same mate. He misses it again. He misses it again. And now rook f2 check is a save, but now it's mate in 2 again, and he misses it again, and now rook d5 is a draw. Rook d5, oh my gosh, Nepo is drawing. He just has to shuffle back and forth. He has to bring this rook, because then if the king runs over here, he trades rooks, and he stops the pawn, but he checks him with the other rook, and now the king hides on h2, and Nordjrbek is winning again with a queen, a deflection, pawn to g3. It's not mate, but it's good enough. Jan resigns. Nordjrbek Abdusatorov, the 17-year-old wonder kid from Uzbekistan, not only beats Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana and Levon Ranyan in the same tournament, he also wins the playoff versus Jan Nepomniachtchi and is the youngest ever Rapid World Champion. Absolutely incredible. I hope you made it this far in the recap. 32 minutes. We just covered like 16 games. That might be a world record. I'm sorry if I went fast. But the game and the day was just, it was amazing. And tomorrow, we begin the World Blitz. You can talk about the format and all the issues in the comments. I would love to see the heated debate, but I don't think there's a single person on earth who liked how this shaped out and Magnus Carlsen not winning the World Rapid Championship, or at least getting a chance to play in the playoff. And Fabiano Caruana.